Right now, Ken Paxton acquitted, the Attorney General cleared by the Texas Senate of impeachment articles. Back on the job, Paxton speaks publicly for the first time about his trial.
Dave Phelan, the Speaker, is controlled by the Democrats.
Political fallout. Democratic and Republican lawmakers sound off about the verdict and whether a trial should have taken place.
I don't agree with the Senate's verdict, but I have to live with it.
I'm Jack Fink. Get your fix for Texas politics. This is a special edition of Eye on Politics, a wrap-up of the Paxton impeachment trial and a look ahead. Hello and welcome. We begin with the political whirlwind that has surrounded Attorney General Ken Paxton and his impeachment for the last 4 months. He's back on the job after the Republican majority in the Texas Senate cleared him of the impeachment articles filed against him by the Republican majority in the House. Paxton broke his silence in an interview with Tucker Carlson on the platform X.
We were causing a lot of trouble for the Biden administration. Even if we didn't win, we slowed them down, and we were winning, I think our number is 77% of our cases. So we are a huge problem for the Biden administration, and that was the way to get me out of the way. And Dave Phelan, the Speaker, is controlled by the Democrats.
Explain that a little bit for those who haven't
So the House
followed.
Investigating Committee, there's 5 members. There's 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats.
It's Texas House.
Texas House. They are responsible for, they are the ones that investigated me, and they hired, I think it was 4 lawyers. 2 of them came from the Biden DOJ. That's not an accident. They were sent there.
Paxton's former top deputies, all conservatives he hired, testified at his trial that he abused the power of his office to help Nate Paul, one of his campaign donors, and himself at the public's expense. The Attorney General's impeachment and acquittal are both historic. He became only the 3rd state official to be impeached and the only one not convicted. Attorney General Ken Paxton wasn't in the Senate chamber to watch Texas senators vote on his political future. Aside from acquitting Paxton of all 16 impeachment articles considered, senators also dropped the remaining 4 articles against him. It really was all about the math. 30 senators voted. Paxton's wife, Senator Angela Paxton of McKinney, was barred from voting because of her conflict, but the Texas Constitution required her to attend the trial and be in the chamber. Because of that, her presence counted toward the 2/3 majority needed for conviction. That was 21 votes. All 12 Democrats chose to convict Paxton, which means they would have needed 9 Republicans to join them. A source tells CBS News Texas senators came close to meeting that 21-vote threshold. We've learned 20 senators, including 8 Republicans, were ready to convict Paxton, and 4 others were on the fence. And when they didn't reach 21, Republicans backed away. In the end, only 2 Republicans, Kelly Hancock of North Richland Hills and Robert Nichols of Jacksonville, joined Democrats in voting to convict Paxton. And so he was acquitted. In an interview with CBS News Texas, Hancock confirmed how close the Senate came to convicting the Attorney General.
We were very close.
Why do you think it got so close and yet then it fell apart for Republicans to join Democrats?
Yeah, that's a question for my for my colleagues, not me.
Did you see the change take place?
Sure. Yeah, I saw it.
Hancock said he believed the evidence and testimony from Paxton's former top deputies. After the vote, he's received a flood of supportive emails, texts, and phone calls. One message stands out to him. Nichols issued a statement that says in part, quote, "The oath I swore to render a true verdict based on the evidence presented did not leave room for politics or second guessing. I have and always will vote for what I believe is right." Democratic Senator Nathan Johnson of Dallas praised both Nichols and Hancock. He was among the Democrats who bashed the outcome.
Ken Paxton is a crook.
Democrat Royce West of Dallas said he's also concerned about the message Paxton's acquittal sends to the public. Republicans needed 10 votes to acquit Paxton. They already had 6 votes before any testimony was given. Bob Hall of Edgewood, whose district includes Dallas County, Tan Parker of Flower Mound, Paul Betancourt, Donna Campbell, Brandon Creighton, and Lois Kolkhorst supported Paxton's motion to dismiss all the impeachment articles on the first day of trial. After the verdict, Hall sharply criticized the House for rushing its impeachment investigation. Senator Paxton congratulated and thanked her husband's attorneys. She issued a statement this week saying, quote, "I wholeheartedly affirm the Senate's decision to acquit. Had I been allowed to vote, I would have cast my vote with those who acquitted on each and every article, and also with the 6 senators who voted affirmatively on the motions to dismiss presented at the beginning of the proceedings. I'm incredibly grateful for the outpouring of personal support and encouragement that I have received over the past 5 months." Republican State Representative Charlie Garen of Fort Worth, one of the lawmakers who oversaw the House investigation into Paxton and one of the House impeachment managers, said he wasn't happy with the trial outcome. He blasted Paxton for not taking the stand in his own defense at trial.
And it sounds like that really bothered you, the fact that he wasn't there to listen to any of the testimony. There were a variety of key moments during the trial. Some centered on the impeachment article accusing Paxton of constitutional bribery. House prosecutors said Paxton benefited from Nate Paul hiring his alleged mistress in exchange for giving Paul specialized access to the Attorney General's office.
Lawyers for House impeachment managers called Paxton's alleged mistress to testify, but ultimately Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who presided over the trial, announced she didn't have to. This week, the lead attorney for the House, Rusty Hardin, told CBS News Texas that Olson was going to take the Fifth. Hardin said they didn't believe she should have that protection because she wasn't in legal jeopardy, but that the lieutenant governor overruled them. Earlier in the trial, Paxton's former chief of staff, Missy Carey, testified that Paxton's alleged affair had upset the staff, and that in 2018, Paxton apologized to the staff in a meeting with Mrs. Paxton. But the next summer, Carey said she had another conversation with the Attorney General. Paxton's former assistant, Andrew Wicker, testified that he and his dad saw the AG and Olson together at an Austin hotel. Paxton's former top deputies, including Ryan Bangert, said it was part of a pattern. At one point, Mark Penley, Paxton's former top prosecutor, testified about a meeting he attended with the Attorney General and Paul. A major flashpoint came when another top deputy, Ryan Vassar, said he and others had no other choice but to report their concerns to the FBI 3 years ago this month. Under cross-examination, Paxton's lawyers challenged Vassar about the evidence they brought to the FBI. The next morning, attorneys for the House asked Vassar to clarify what he meant.
Paxton's attorney accused the former top deputies of trying to conduct a coup and topple the Attorney General, an accusation they denied. The Attorney General remains under federal investigation, and a federal grand jury in San Antonio was meeting to look into ties between Paxton and Paul. The Attorney General also still faces a trial on state securities fraud charges, first filed against him 8 years ago. Paxton has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing. While the impeachment trial is over, the political fallout isn't, and the friction between Republican leaders in the House and Senate continues to grow more intense. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick criticized House Speaker Dade Phelan.
The Speaker and his team rammed through the first impeachment of a statewide official in Texas in over 100 years, while paying no attention to the precedent that the House set in every other impeachment before. Our founders expected better. It should have never happened this year, and hopefully it doesn't again unless we address this in the Constitution.
Speaker Phelan responded in a statement saying, quote, "I find it deeply concerning that after weeks of claiming he would preside over this trial in an impartial and honest manner, Lieutenant Governor Patrick would conclude by confessing his bias and placing his contempt for the people's House on full display." To be clear, Patrick attacked the House for standing up against corruption. Up next, two in-depth interviews with two Republican lawmakers, Senator Kelly Hancock of North Richland Hills, who voted to convict Paxton, and Representative Charlie Garen of Fort Worth, one of the lawmakers who prosecuted the impeachment case against Paxton. Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas. We'll be right back. Welcome back. State Senator Kelly Hancock of North Richland Hills was only one of two Republicans who voted to convict Paxton on the impeachment articles. He told us why he felt so strongly about his decision.
Well, just based on the testimony and the evidence. I mean, we had a constitutional obligation to render a verdict, based on the truth as it was presented. And, there was a lot presented. It basically was several cases in one impeachment process with limited time because we limited the time there. So, it's just based on the testimony and the evidence that I had available to me.
Why did you believe him? What was credible about it?
Well, it took, the witnesses, number one. I mean, when you looked at the handpicked team that the Attorney General and had assembled, it was really some of the class top-notch attorneys and really in the country, because we brought, he was able to bring some true conservatives in from other states, really to come work for him and to work in the state of Texas. And in fact, and so they, and the testimonies that they shared, the evidence is, they were truly seeking what was best for him and felt like they were seeking what was best from him all along. And so, and then you look on the other side, the defense's witnesses, and the first thing I remember about, Brent Webster, which replaced Jeff McTeer, was he came before Senate Finance and he lied to us.
And did that bother you?
Yeah, I don't really like being lied to, nor do I think, nobody does. And it's certainly not a good first impression.
And so let's talk about these 16 articles of impeachment that really were at the heart of
Yeah.
this, because 4 were put in abeyance. What were the strongest articles of impeachment in your mind? What really said to you, because you convicted on most of them, obviously. 13
Well,
of the 16, right?
The ones that I felt like, the evidence was there, and was able to get rid of reasonable doubt. I couldn't justify reasonable doubt based on the testimony and the evidence. And so, probably the ones at the end that were kind of the all-encompassing, abuse of office, when you weighed everything up together, those are probably the ones that, when you look at and you stacked on one on the other of the other articles, those are probably the ones at the end that you go, all right, clearly this occurred.
And how much blowback have you gotten since your decision
Yeah.
to convict?
Which is funny. So a lot of the blowback is out of the state. I can tell you within my district, and I, leaving there, I immediately came home because I had a 3-day-old grandson that I wanted to see. So I changed clothes, jumped in the car, because that's family's. I could stay and do interviews, but really I wanted to get back with family and especially see my new grandson Gray. And so I expected my phone to blow up, as it had done with people trying to tell me how to vote, that I didn't look at until afterwards. But 3 hours home, my wife, I never called her because I was having phone calls and text messages of encouragement. Thank you for your courage. I appreciate what you did. And, phone calls across the spectrum of Republicans and constituents. And,
So Republicans were praising you.
oh, yeah. Yeah.
How,
Of all flavors, by the way, of Republicans.
what does that mean?
Well, I mean, not everybody fits into one mode. I know there are some that want Republicans to fit into a single mode, but there are Republicans across the spectrum. Some engaged, and I guess the ones I heard from probably consistently, the ones that when I walk into a coffee shop want to shake my hand and thank me. The ones that when I go to the gym will say, I don't want to interrupt your workout, but I just wanted to shake your hand. Are the Republicans, but they're not the loud Republicans. They're just the consistent ones. And yeah, I couldn't keep up with my text messages all the way home, literally. And it still happens to this day. I mean, I still have a few days later. Now it's dropped a little bit, but still it's more encouragement than I've ever received in elected office.
Were you threatened by people who were very much against your vote?
I don't know if you saw the TV, but there was a lot of money seeking to essentially jury tamper mailers in my district. Heck, paid for an ad on TV during the Republican debate. So clearly there was an effort to impact my position, and I just had to block all that out and do what I knew was right and what I felt. I knew it was right for me. I had an obligation to my constituents, to God, to vote according to what I believe to be true.
Did you ever hesitate to convict?
No.
Why not?
Because of the testimony and the evidence. I mean, what I had before me, and I didn't, there were some I didn't vote for. I mean, there was, did he was he able to block voters from information in the whistleblower case? Sure, absolutely. By delaying it and appealing things, that evidence was not available to voters. But at the end of the day, I had to make the determination, was that intentional or was that just the legal process? And so I didn't support that one, even though it clearly happened. Voters did not have access to all those testimonies in those whistleblower cases that are moving along, and they're in the process now. It'll be in Houston. And so I didn't vote on that one because I felt like there were some gaps there. So there were, two that I didn't feel like all the evidence proved that case, and so I didn't support those.
So what was your reaction as the voting was going on and you could see acquittal after acquittal after acquittal?
Each one of us had to vote our convictions, and I did, and was comfortable. And I've shared with people that it was a very anxious time, and I kind of expected to have a little anxiety, knowing that I didn't know whether I'd be alone or not, being the only Republican voting based on what I felt like were the truth behind the evidence that we had presented and available to us. Not all was presented. I had to go find some things in the 450 documents that were available to us that didn't pop up on our screen. But
You went back to look at the documents.
Oh yeah,
Did
I
other
thought
senators do that too?
some, but I had an incredible peace. I was comfortable that I was doing the right thing, but I still thought I'd be anxious. But I had a peace, frankly, that hard to explain.
Are you disappointed by the acquittals?
It's not over yet. No one's saying he's innocent, and we know the whistleblower case is moving forward. We didn't look at the SEC, put those in abatement, and that's moving forward. And so, and there's a grand jury in San Antonio now. So, I think this is far from over. Did it go differently than what I believe to be accurate based on the evidence before us? Sure, but I can't change that. And I've lived my life for 30 years, Jack. As you know, I had kidney failure for 30 years. I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't change it, so I had to live my life and move on. So you learn to take things a day at a time, and just like the kidney. One day, my son-in-law donated one, and I'm a different person today. And I think one day this will work itself out. Did that situation, your health, give you extra strength to make your decision? I'm blessed to have suffered with kidney failure for 30 years because it taught me things. It taught me what's important. I never knew when I'd be on dialysis. I never knew when that day would come. With the disease I had, it's very rare and it does what it wants. So it taught me perspective. It taught me to live a day at a time. It taught me not to get caught up in things that don't go my way. Things weren't going. They haven't gone my way in 30 years. I didn't want kidney failure, and so it's taught me a lot, and I'm thankful that I had to deal with it. But I think the whole event was summed up when my daughter texted me on my way home. Dad, we're proud of you. You have no idea how many times your grandchildren will hear this story. Jack, that's when I knew doing the right thing, doing what I believed in, where the evidence took me, that's all that matters, my family. That's why I left immediately.
Sounds like it was an emotional moment for you.
All the congratulatory texts, because, look, what I want to do is properly represent my constituents with integrity, with ethics, and with character, things we don't talk about much in politics anymore. But to me, they really matter. I don't want to serve if I can't do it. And I think to my constituents they matter, and while some, just because I disagree with them, turn away and say whatever they want to say. I think the majority of my constituents, they want someone that still think those things are important and will live by them even if they disagree with them.
My understanding is that Republicans came very close to meeting that 21 vote threshold. Obviously you had the 12 Democrats, and then it came very close to getting a 9th Republican. True?
We were very close.
You had 8, right?
We were very close.
What
And I think you see, you know, in statements coming out, again, nobody's claiming he's innocent. If you look at the statements, in fact, you know, Senator Springer has said, hey, essentially, I don't believe he's innocent. I just didn't feel like I had enough evidence to vote differently.
Why do you think it got so close and yet then it fell apart for Republicans to join Democrats?
Yeah, you know, that's a question for for my colleagues, not me. I know I've voted based on my convictions and based on the evidence that I had before me.
Did you see the change take place during
Sure.
deliberation?
Yeah, I saw it. But at the same time, I mean, there were some articles that I was uncertain about, that as I looked at more evidence and I looked at my timeline, because I'd put together a timeline, I'd put together a chart with the facts and the various articles. You know, you had so much being poured out at one time and then so much available that wasn't presented because we ran out of time, that I had to put together charts and graphs to get me all the evidence together so I could, you know, work my way through it. And some of them, the timeline mattered, and it changed me from a no to a yes on conviction. And so I don't know what their process was, what they went through. You know, that's complete. You know, that's up to my colleagues to come up with. They had their own vote.
Were you disappointed though as you were going through it and as you could see the change?
My colleagues had their own vote. Again, I've lived with disappointment. You know, you can't rest on that. You just have to do what's right and move on.
I've seen allegations that, you know, certain senators were counting votes, you know, there was whipping going on. I've seen accusations that the lieutenant governor tried to put his thumb on the scale. Can you clear the air for us? Did that happen?
You know, we know each other, and in deliberation you can kind of see, but there was no counting of votes. I'm not aware of, you know, of the lieutenant governor attempting to tip the scales. You know, is there an impact when the presiding officer determines committee assignments, determines chairmanships? You know, we're the Senate, and he's the one that makes all those decisions. But I never saw that or heard anything about him reaching out or him trying to, you know, impact any of the votes of the senators.
Are you concerned your vote will impact whether you're a chairman next session?
You know, Jack, I've been a chairman of a powerful position, and I've been, you know, given a new chairmanship based on our differences. But my job is to represent my constituents and do what I think's right. And if being a chairman of a powerful committee becomes more important than me doing what's right and representing my constituents, that's the wrong position for me to have.
Dick Garen said in an interview, and Dick Garen was one of the attorneys for the House impeachment managers, he said senators were chickens. What do you make of that statement? Do you agree?
That's Dick Garen's statement. You'll have to ask him.
But do you agree with it?
I look forward to working with my colleagues. I think, you know, where they came to their decisions up to them. And
let me ask you about.
And you know,
go ahead.
you don't serve in the Senate and be a chicken. You just don't, because it doesn't matter what you do. People are going to criticize you. So.
How worried are you about being primaried? I mean, you haven't been primaried since 2012, so it's over a decade, am I right? So how concerned are you about that?
None.
Why not?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, God's in charge of all things. And again, through my experiences and my health situation, I live a day at a time. I mean, that's a long way off. My job today is do the best I can. I mean, my prayer today was be truthful, be honest, you know, be relaxed. A day at a time, Jack.
Did you have a chance to see the Attorney General and his interview with Tucker Carlson?
No, and really, in order to do right by the interviews, you know, I've kind of avoided some of those intentionally because I don't expect all the statements made to be truthful based on history. I mean, and I didn't want it to impact this interview or any other interview. I didn't want it to impact my emotions, my psyche. I just wanted to come and be honest and truthful, and kind of the way I ran from the very beginning when I first started this 17 years ago is, hey, look, I'm just me, and if that works, vote for me. I can't try to be something I'm not, or someone I'm not.
What was your thought about the Attorney General not attending most of the trial and the fact that he did not testify in his own defense?
Yeah, that's been what he said, but what we know is he was asked several times to testify before the House, and he refused to. When he testified before the Senate, when we got to a point of saying something that Brent Webster said that was inaccurate, he stepped aside and let his first assistant say that, and then clearly, I mean, the Senate was his, and he still chose to not even be in town for a piece of it, or show up. And so you'll have to I think he was given more than ample opportunity to tell his side of the story in spite of what he says publicly and on the radio.
Did that bother you, that he wasn't there?
I think you take all things into evidence, and the fact that he wasn't there, there was a verse that kind of I got early in this process. It's John 3:19 through 21, and it talks about how evil likes the darkness, but truth likes the light, because they want everyone to see their actions were actions before God. And so, the action and not being there was evidence I took into account. Not willing to sit. I know what I would do. If I were telling the truth, I want to be there to back and represent that truth. So I can just tell you what my actions I would have been present in order to be a part of the truth that was coming out.
During his interview with Tucker Carlson, he blamed the Biden administration for wanting to take him out because of his legal challenges against the Biden administration. And he blamed Texas Democrats and Speaker Dade Phelan for trying to get him out of there. Do you agree with that?
I don't think it benefits any of us to blame others for our indiscretions. And so, as a Christian, I believe in grace, I believe in mercy, but that starts with remorse and repentance. And, those are things that I would like to see rather than trying to blame others. Every Attorney General we've ever had is going to go after a Democrat administration. And I don't think at the state level, I don't think Texas. I think Texas deserves both integrity, ethics, strong character, and action. I don't think we have to pick or choose. And I hope as we move forward that while we haven't talked much in politics lately about integrity and ethics and character, I hope this inflection point that has been created brings those things back to the forefront to recognize that you can have both and you deserve both in your elected officials. And we, me included, should be held to a higher esteem.
Did Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick run a fair trial?
There's concerns with the $3 million that were up front, and there were concerns with the closing statement as the presiding officer, but I think he did what he could do to try to run a fair trial, and I told him so. I thought in between those things that, I think were questionable, I personally told him I thought he ran a fair trial in light of everything. I mean, we know clearly where he stood, but I think he really attempted and put a lot of time into doing a good job.
And the $3 million you're referring to is the $1 million contribution and the $2 million loan he received from the Defend Texas Liberty PAC.
Right.
And the comments you're referring to is after the trial, he really condemned the impeachment process and went after Speaker Dade Phelan. Did you agree with his remarks about the Speaker and rushing this through? Do you think this was a fair process?
You know, there's a lot of distraction on the process. My take on it was once we had that constitutional obligation, that's where all my focus was. There's a lot of discussion on that. You know, I would say that both sides, you know, the House, looking back on it, having, you know, not much to look at because it doesn't happen every day, would probably do a few things different. But, Jack, it didn't matter once we had it. Our job, now it's our job. Abide by the Constitution, seek the truth, take the evidence and the testimonies, and do what we were constitutionally obligated to do. And then on our side, I think, you know, in hindsight, having a presiding officer that determines chairmanships, determines committee, you know, those are things that we could eliminate from the impeachment process. That so I think both sides have learned lessons that we would tweak things as we move forward, and I think that's why we had an opportunity to enter remarks into the journal. So for history, as people move forward, they can look at that and go, all right, here's what they felt like they did well, here are things they would do differently. So,
do you think changes should be made to the impeachment process, at least as far as the House is concerned?
You know, I'm one that always believes we can improve, and so I think we can improve on both sides, and hopefully we don't have to worry about that for years to come. But I think it's good to have that in the journal for a historical record when people look back.
There's a lot of friction between the Lieutenant Governor and Speaker Dade Phelan, and as you know, there's going to be another special session, maybe two, and school choice is going to be among the topics, according to Governor Abbott, which we've known. And so I'm wondering, what impact do you think this friction will have on the Senate and the House's ability to agree on legislation, et cetera, including school choice?
Yeah, it's going to be detrimental. You know, all of us work to get better with people we can get along with, and you know, it's how I've tried to spend my legislative career, is making friends, not enemies, and trying to work with people, even if I disagree with them strongly. I think that's, for me, I think that's important in elected officials. But it's going to make it more difficult, obviously. You know, that's not a question you have to ask because you know the answer.
I did want to ask you, just going back to the trial for a minute, the fact that Laura Olson was not allowed to testify. What was your sense of that? Because what we are reporting is that she was going to take the Fifth, and the House felt she shouldn't be given that protection because she wasn't under legal jeopardy, and the Lieutenant Governor overruled and said she's not going to testify. Did you want to hear from her?
It would be good to hear from her. I'm not sure from a legal standpoint, and impeachment's different. I mean, we talked about it being civil, criminal, and some called it political. Unfortunately, I think it was somewhat political. I don't think it should be political. I think the impeachment's way more important than turning it into a political event. And yes, it would be good to hear from her. It'd be good to hear from Kevin, the construction guy that they couldn't find because he was running from subpoenas. The more evidence we had, obviously, the better. And so, and even pleading the Fifth, that is evidence. When someone comes up and pleads the Fifth, and you can go from that to making some assumptions. The courts allow you to do that. So I don't blame the House for wanting to get her on the stand and plead the Fifth. And yet I don't know circumstances where she was mentally or where she was anything else. Or, maybe she could have incriminated herself. Maybe she didn't tell the FBI the truth, and telling the truth to us would have caused her. So I just don't know all the elements that went into the ruling. So you know, where I was, you just have to trust the ruling.
Just a couple more questions, and you know what we're talking about with Laura Olson, and then you mentioning the contractor. This was about the renovations to the Paxton's Austin house, and these were subjects of the 2 bribery counts against the Attorney General, and you voted to convict on both accounts. Why?
Yeah, and so really the evidence that I went through, you know, one of the things, the distraction that was there was that the construction we were talking about was either the insurance related, which was a separate deal. Yeah, it was done and it was paid for by insurance, or it was the kitchen, which wasn't done or was done, whatever. That really didn't matter. When I was able to look at the evidence more closely, I found that it was refinishing floors, which they moved in July. The invoice was created October 1. It was backdated to September 1, due September 30th. And when you looked at the metadata, the invoice was never even sent. And so, you know, the work that was done was floors, fixtures, things that are done before you ever move into a house. And so there was, once I was able to dig through it and find the facts, and it became, you know, that was one that I was like, I don't know, until I found more evidence going through the 450 documents, and I got there and I went, yeah, this seems to have occurred.
What did you think was going on? What do you think happened?
You know, Jack, I think it all started with the affair, and things just started going downhill after that, and the relationship with Nate Paul was not a healthy relationship. You know, his top lieutenants, his top deputies tried to warn him about that relationship. You know, we know that just recently Nate Paul was taken away in handcuffs and is going to trial. We don't know that he's guilty, but we know he's going to trial, and there was enough to handcuff him and haul him out. And so I just think it started snowballing, and Nate Paul began to ask for one favor and then another, and obviously his world was financially was collapsing. So things just got out of hand, and you know, and unfortunately, one lie leads to another, and you get where there's no way to get out of it.
My last question to you, and I appreciate your time, and that is, you talked about integrity. What message do you think Attorney General Ken Paxton's acquittal sends to the public?
Well, rather than the message it sends, which was my concern, I didn't want to send a message to my constituents that I thought he was innocent. And you know, I've seen a write-up recently where they equated acquittal with innocence. It's not innocence. It could be not enough evidence, or it could be reasonable doubt, but it doesn't mean innocent. And so rather than the message it sends, I hope the whole process, where it brings us to, is that a higher regard and a higher standard for our elected officials. That people wake up and make, for the first time in a long time, integrity, ethics, character, moral character, and recognize they can have both. An elected official that represents them, that seeks the truth, but also maintains those elements. And I want those to be, once again, a priority for our elected officials and the voters to look to that. And I hope that this creates that awareness that that's important again, and elevates it, that we hold all of us to a higher standard, a higher level of accountability.
Republican State Senator Kelly Hancock, thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Jack.
We appreciate you. Coming up, our interview with State Representative Charlie Garen, one of the House impeachment managers, tells us what he thinks about the verdict. And later, how do Republicans in the House and Senate move forward given the bad blood between the Lieutenant Governor and House Speaker? Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas returns in a moment. Republican State Representative Charlie Garen of Fort Worth was a key player in the House who oversaw the investigation into Attorney General Ken Paxton. He spoke out about the verdict and other key moments of the impeachment process.
Well, Jack, while I don't necessarily agree with their verdict. I have to respect that. That's the Senate's job. The House's job is to impeach. Their job is to determine whether he's guilty or not. And so, therefore, I respect what the Senate did.
Do you think they got it wrong?
Well, we worked, the House worked for a long time. We interviewed a lot of witnesses, and you have to understand that General Paxton came to the House and the Senate asking for $3.3 million over the whistleblower lawsuit, and was asked to talk about that in front of Senate Finance, in front of two committees in the House, and he refused to do that. And so the Joint Investigating Committee took it up, and after several months of interviewing witnesses, the committee voted to put the impeachment question before the House, and the House passed it.
I want to get back to that, but I just wanted to follow up. When you first heard the first impeachment article and he was acquitted, did you have a funny feeling that was it?
No, I didn't, Jack. Obviously, it's as Lieutenant Governor Patrick said, this is a political trial. It was not a criminal trial. It was not a civil trial. It was political, and when politics get involved, the outcome is always up in the air.
Why were you so, why did you feel so strongly that the Attorney General be impeached?
I took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the state of Texas, the United States, the state of Texas, and the laws. And after hearing from a lot of people, and especially the whistleblowers, I believe that General Paxton, who took the same oath, did not, and therefore I thought it was time. I take that oath very seriously, and I believe that we had to go forward at that point.
One of the key moments of the trial came with Laura Olson being called to testify by the House, and then that was delayed, and then later in the day, the Lieutenant Governor announced that she was unavailable. What was your reaction to that? Do you think that was fair?
We had that happened also, the Lieutenant Governor, because of the Senate rules, and the Senate sets their own rules, we weren't allowed to call Nate Paul or Laura Olson, and the contractor, we were never even able to find him to serve a subpoena. So that's just part of it.
The contractor on the Paxton's house in
Yes,
Austin that was renovated.
Right.
How damaging was that to the case?
You'd have to ask one of the senators.
Let me ask you, go back to your comments about the General Investigating Committee. After the verdicts, Lieutenant Governor really railed against the House impeachment. And he said, and I'll read it to you, the Speaker and his team rammed through the first impeachment of a statewide official in Texas in over 100 years while paying no attention to the precedent that the House set in every other impeachment before. Any testimony given in a House impeachment investigation must be given under oath, and the target must be allowed to present with a lawyer to cross-examine the witnesses. Otherwise, people can say whatever they want without any accountability. What was your reaction when he went off and really sharply criticized the Speaker and you all?
I think his comments are going to make it more difficult for the House and the Senate to work together in any special sessions going forward. And the Lieutenant Governor's entitled to his opinion, as I am, and I believe that the House acts as a grand jury, and not all grand juries' testimony is under oath. And I don't believe that we made an improper decision.
The Speaker, in response, said that he criticized the Lieutenant Governor. He said his tirade disrespects the constitutional impeachment process afforded to us by the founders of this great state. The inescapable conclusion is that today's outcome appears to have been orchestrated from the start, cheating the people of Texas of justice. Do you agree with that?
As I'll go back to what I said earlier, the Lieutenant Governor said this was a political trial, and there's a lot of things at play in anything that's political, and I don't, as I said, I don't agree with the Senate's verdict, but I have to live with it.
And one of the things that I remember when you were going through the impeachment on the Memorial Day weekend, and you were one of the people who was laying out the case against the Attorney General, and you announced that the Attorney General himself was calling lawmakers on the House floor. That took a lot of people by surprise.
Well, it took me by surprise, Jack, when two of the members of the House told me that they were called while sitting on the House floor on their cell phones by the Attorney General and told that they were going to get an opponent if they voted for impeachment. And I have no reason to doubt their word.
Were you angry?
I was very angry.
Why?
I think that he really overstepped his bounds, and I'll go back to my oath. I want to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of Texas and the laws of the Constitution. I mean, the laws of the United States and the state of Texas. And I believe that threatening witnesses or threatening people before their vote is against the law.
I wanted to ask you about what you said before about just, the House and the Senate working together, because there is another special session coming up. How much harder do you think it's going to be able to pass bills, specifically school choice is still out there?
I haven't talked to anybody about that since the verdict came down on Saturday. So it really is not a good time to comment on that.
And how worried are you about being primaried?
Well, I've run several times. I've had several primary opponents, and as Sam Houston said, do what's right and risk the consequences. I believe that I did what was right.
You discussed before about the reason this all got started was that the Attorney General had requested the House and Senate pay $3.3 million, which was basically the settlement agreement with the whistleblowers.
With not all the whistleblowers.
3 of the 4.
3 of the 4.
And so I'm wondering, now the Lieutenant Governor has called for a full audit to find out how much the House spent on its investigation. Is it more than $3.3 million?
I don't have any idea.
And if it is it worth money? Is it money well spent?
I believe that it was money well spent, yes.
Why?
I believe that we had to dig into what went on because the Attorney General would not come to the House and he would not come to the Senate and he would not tell us what went on. He had the opportunity to testify in his own trial. He chose not to be at the trial, not to be there. And all along he said he wanted to tell his side of the story. He had that opportunity. He never took it.
And it sounds like that really bothered you, the fact that he wasn't there to listen to any of the testimony.
Well, it bothers me that he decided he didn't need to tell his side of the story after he'd been railing about that the entire time since May.
And did it bother you the fact that he wasn't there to hear the testimony?
I believe that he should have been.
Why?
I believe that he should have been there just like we were to hear all the testimony, and and at that time he could have had the opportunity to rebut any of it that he wanted to, but he chose not to testify.
What did you make of Senator Angela Paxton's comments that she fully supports and agrees with not only the verdict of him being acquitted, but with the 6 senators who wanted to drop all the impeachment articles even before the trial began?
I honestly have not seen any of Senator Paxton's statements.
What did you think of those 6 senators who wanted to drop all the charges before the trial started?
Well, once again, that was their prerogative. I would have disagreed with them, and I think that decision was wrong. But it's their decision and their vote.
What message do you think the acquittal sent to the public?
I think that it said that that General Paxton can get away with just about anything he wants to, but there's other charges out there. There's a federal grand jury investigation going on at this time, and there's state charges in district court in Harris County that are coming up, and I don't know how any of those will play out. That's up to a whole different set of jurors at this time.
One of the things people were wondering is if this has any impact, the impeachment process will have any impact on the federal investigation.
I don't have any idea. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not that familiar with the federal system.
Is there anything else that I didn't ask you about that you want the public to know?
No, I'm just, other than that, I disagree with the verdict, but I have to support it because that's the way the Constitution is written. The House is a grand jury and the Senate is the trial court. The Senate are the jurors and they voted to acquit, and that's something that, that we have to put that behind us now and go forward.
I did have one other question. How much blowback have you got?
Really, I haven't.
Constituents from other Republicans?
I've gotten a couple calls. I've gotten a lot. I've gotten actually more calls in support than I have in opposition, and
by Republicans.
By Republicans, yes. By Republicans within District 99 as well as out.
State Representative Charlie Garen of Fort Worth. Thank you so much.
Jack, thank you.
Up next, how will the Republican majorities in the Texas House and Senate work together going forward, given the animosity between their leaders? Our conversation with former Texas Education Agency Commissioner and Railroad Commissioner Michael Williams when we come back. With all the back and forth between Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and House Speaker Dave Phelan, the question many in the legislature are wondering is how will the Republican majorities in each chamber work together in the upcoming special session next month? We spoke with Michael Williams, the first elected African-American statewide official in Texas.
Going forward, I think we'll continue to have this sort of difference of opinion and this sort of distant relationship between not just simply the lieutenant governor and the speaker, but between the two chambers themselves and each other. And so there's going to have to be some mending of the relationships between the Republicans in the Pink Building.
How quickly does that have to happen? Because as you know, Governor Greg Abbott just said this week that there's going to be another special session starting next month. School choice is going to come up. And that obviously is a very controversial decision in the House. And so how quickly do those fences need to be mended? And if they aren't, what impact could that have?
Well, the fences need to be mended quickly, but those things generally don't happen quickly. And the fact that we will have at least one and perhaps several special sessions only creates opportunities for there to be more opportunities for there to be strong differences of opinion between the two chambers. And so I don't expect this to happen anytime soon.
And so what does that mean for Governor Greg Abbott? Because he's pushing hard to get school choice passed.
Well, I think for the governor, he has to develop relationships himself between members of both chambers in order to be successful in getting the legislation that he's interested in passed. And so the difference of opinion or the difference in terms of the relationship between Republicans in the House and Republicans in the Senate, that makes his work a little harder, no doubt, because he's got to work with both of them so that he can get a majority of both chambers to vote for his legislation. It increases his workload for sure.
So what has to happen for fences to be mended?
Well, I think as I've said before, a grown-up has to appear, and probably at least two grown-ups. And they have to be members. It's not the governor. It has to be a member of the House or a Republican member of the Senate that comes to their respective colleagues and says, guys, gals, this isn't good for Texas. We're not being responsible in fully doing the business of Texans. And let's get away from all of the he said, she said, and let's get away from all the friction, and let's just simply focus on the work of Texas. But that has to be a grown-up, and that grown-up will understand that he or she is putting their own career at risk. Because the first person who says to their colleagues, we're not doing the business of the people of Texas, and we need to put aside these differences, is not going to be well received. That's why I said there needs to be at least two grown-ups, because it's going to be the second one that has to close the deal.
And why don't you believe Governor Abbott should be touching that?
He's not a member. This is a fight between the members. In this particular fight, he's an outsider. Now, he can arbitrate, he can mediate, but this is a fight between Republicans in the House and Republicans in the Senate. He's neither. He can arbitrate, he can mediate, he can call them together. But it has to be the two chambers who say we have to quit fighting each other.
And there's also a dispute between Republicans in the House because you had those members who voted to impeach Attorney General Ken Paxton and those who opposed doing that. And my question now is, do you think that Speaker Phelan is in trouble? Because during a special session, there may be some House Republican who calls a vote for the chair, right? To try to...
And you can at any time. I mean, obviously, we saw Representative Steve Toth, member of the House, decide to resign from the Texas House Freedom Caucus over the impeachment issue. And you're right, there were 20 members, Republican members of the Texas House, who have now called for an apology from Speaker Phelan and for his resignation. There is no doubt that he's at risk. And we'll see if in the course of the time between now and the special session beginning and during it, whether he can keep his troops together such that he can remain as speaker. You know, the interesting thing is, in terms of the 20 who have called for his resignation, it will be interesting to see if they can find enough support outside of their group of 20 to be able to overtake and overthrow the speaker. I tend to doubt that, because that would mean they'd have to be, you know, creating a coalition of people who actually wanted to impeach the speaker. I mean, to impeach the attorney general. So that doesn't seem quite likely.
And one of the things, I don't know if you had a chance to watch Ken Paxton's interview with Tucker Carlson last night, but one of the things that he said was he talked about the fact that in the Texas House, he blamed the Biden administration, he blamed Texas Democrats for causing all this and having an impact on Speaker Dade Phelan. And so my question is, they were discussing about the fact that the House, there are Democratic chairs of committees, et cetera. There's been a lot of internal friction within the House GOP and the Texas GOP itself about whether Republicans should be the only ones to chair committees and whether Republicans should be the only ones to actually vote on a speaker instead of having Democrats. And so I'm wondering, do you think that this will reignite all of this and perhaps lead to a change this time around?
You know, it has been the custom and the history of the Texas House that chairs came from both parties. No matter who the speaker was, the speaker could have been a Democrat, the speaker could have been a Republican. I don't foresee that changing anytime soon. And I did not see the Attorney General's interview last night, but I have read news accounts about it. But I don't see that changing.
And talk to me a little bit about the broader disruption that this impeachment has caused within the Republican Party of Texas. Would you describe this as a civil war in the Republican Party?
Well, Jack, I said when President Trump got the nomination in 2016, and I definitely said when he got the nomination in 2020, that whether he won and was returned to the White House or whether he lost and became a private citizen, we as Republicans were going to go through a civil war. And we're in the midst of a civil war today. We're in the midst of a civil war to determine the soul and direction of this party. It may not be the principles of Ronald Reagan as we go forward. It may be something else, but we're fighting about what that something else is. And there's no doubt. I mean, you see it in terms of just here in Texas. You see it in terms of the fight within the Texas House among Republicans. You see it among the fight between the Senate and its co-chamber, the Texas House. We are in a civil war right now. And there's nothing wrong about that. You know, Clemenza made the comment in The Godfather when they were talking about going to the matches. You got to do this every 10 years or so. That's all right. Ain't no big deal.
How do you see this shaking out?
Well, I wish I had that talent. I don't have the talent to do that kind of prognostication. It will be uglier before it gets better. What side wins, I don't know. And the longer it takes for a grown-up to enter the room, the uglier it'll be.
So let me ask you a couple of other questions. First, where do you see this school choice vote going? Do you think that will pass?
I think it's still tough. I think it's tough for rural Republicans, and I think it's tough because we still sell. I made my first speech about school choice in 1989, in favor of school choice, 1989. I wrote my first commentary in 1990. We still talk about school choice as if we're moving a youngster from Thomas Jefferson High School to St. Thomas Aquinas High School. They're moving from one building to another. And I think one way to attract rural Republicans would be to provide many vouchers so that moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas can find a way to get learning brought to their youngster. I mean, no disrespect to the former governor's hometown of Paint Creek, but you're not going to get a master math teacher or science teacher to move to Paint Creek. And you're probably not going to teach Mandarin Chinese in Paint Creek. But if a mom or dad could get accelerated math and science learning off the internet from a teacher at the University of Texas, or they could buy language services from Babbel or one of the other language providers, then maybe you could get rural Texans interested because there's a way for them to gain something. As it stands now, in terms of the proposed legislation, that's going to be tough. And so I don't think we've properly incentivized them to want to vote for school choice.
I did want to ask you about one other comment that Paxton made last night in his interview with Tucker Carlson, and that was he went after Senator John Cornyn and said somebody needs to challenge him when he's up for re-election in 2026. And Carlson at one point asked him, well, why don't you do it? And he said, everything is on the table. What do you make of that potential scenario of a primary challenge between Senator Cornyn and the AG?
Number one, I take the AG at his word. Everything is on the table. And number two, that would be a very, very interesting primary, because Senator Cornyn has not had a legitimate populist opponent from his right hip. And this would be one on his right hip. This would be somebody who comes with a significant part of the Republican primary voting strength in his pocket. So that would be an interesting challenge for the number 2 ranking senator in the United States Senate.
I did want to ask you to put on your former Texas Education Agency commissioner hat for a second. There are a number of school districts in our area, and I guess across the state, who are suing the Texas Education Agency over 2 things: Robin Hood, and also the changes that are being made through the A through F accountability system, the letter grading that the state provides for school districts and their progress. And so I'm wondering, what do you make of those?
I would say to school officials, good luck with that.
Why?
The TEA lawyers deal with these very, very same issues 24/7, 365. District lawyers deal with these issues maybe once a decade. I was sued probably 30 some times when I was commissioner. At the end of the day, never lost a one. You always lose in state district court in Travis County, then you appeal it up to the Court of Appeals. And if necessary, you appeal it to the Texas Supreme Court. At the end of the day, you win. In this particular matter, When I was commissioner, you did the review annually, and now the legislature, I think in 2017, said that the commissioner has to make his review every 5 years, and this happens to have been the 5th year. And the argument that you could progress and still have a lower grade because you didn't meet the cut score ranking, that happens. You can see where that happens all the time. So I don't see a lot of success coming from the A through F lawsuit. I know it's troublesome for superintendents and principals and perhaps even moms and dads, even the kids themselves. But I don't see a lot of success coming from that lawsuit.
And what about Robin Hood, the challenges to Robin Hood?
I have a great deal of empathy for high property value districts having to take their dollars and send some of their dollars to Austin so that it can support a low property value district elsewhere. And when you think of many of the high property value districts, they're enjoying increased enrollment, but some of the youngsters, or many of the youngsters that are coming to adding to the enrollment, are youngsters that need more instruction, they need more support. So those districts, while they may be high property value districts, they need those dollars to educate their own kids. What I do, and so I understand that and I appreciate that. What I do not understand and what I cannot get behind is the district unilaterally, as some of these districts have suggested they would do, unilaterally making the decision not to send the money to Austin. If this is their way of sort of waving to the members of the legislature that you need to hurry up and fix this, I'm fine with that, because I think they do need to hurry up and fix it. But to unilaterally not send dollars to the state to assist and benefit a low property value district, I think is inappropriate. What you're going to do is put the commissioner in a position where he has to basically artificially take property out of your district and assign it to another district. At the end of the day, you're not going to win that one. The legislature has to fix this.
And, you know, one of the things last night in the interview that Paxton had with Tucker Carlson is he actually brought Robin Hood up, and he blamed this on former governor George W. Bush and Senator Cornyn as the former attorney general. What do you make of that?
Well, in time-wise, that's when it came. That's when it occurred, of course. But the world has changed quite a bit since Robin Hood went into effect. You know, there are a lot of things that we do from a policy perspective that made ample sense at the time. And over time, we have new facts and we have new or additional sort of features to that legislation, and you need to revisit it. And so I'm not going to blame Senator Cornyn or the former governor, Governor Bush, for what we have now. What I would do is to call upon the current leaders to fix it.
Michael Williams, former Texas Education Agency Commissioner, former Railroad Commissioner. Thank you so much. We always appreciate talking with you.
My pleasure, Jack. Good to be here.
That's all for Eye on Politics this week. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jack Fink. I hope to see you again next week. You're watching CBS News Texas.